Bible is just about as wrong as it is possible for any document to be.
For fuck's sake!
They want to go ahead and they want to take this idea and talk about that as if it's real, as if that's what's real.
This is insane. Look at this vastness.
Hello and welcome to the LyingGhostShow, July 28th, 2013, episode 11. Today we have a very interesting show today. We have author and atheist activist David Fitzgerald on. You can unmute your mic.
Hello, how you doing?
We also have Paul C. Hartley, the lovable British atheist.
Evening, all.
We have, I'm not even going to try because I'm going to fail. Caden, who's going to divide side 10 Burden Bake, I think, eventually, right? And we have 13 Heathens, the Boom 105, and the Real Signalis. And the topic today is, did Jesus exist, yes or no? And to start off, we're going to start with the point, stories before the Christ. And David, you want to start?
Sure. I mean, actually, that's not the strongest argument I would make for there being no Jesus. But if you want to talk about, Christ-like figures that were around before Christianity.
Oh, wait. Sorry to interrupt.
No worries.
Yeah, TruthSurge is coming on right now. So he did make it in my time. I didn't expect that.
Well, it's essentially where they could have gotten the inspiration from, that kind of thing. Like the like the Hebrew Jesus, that kind of thing. Right. That's what we're talking about. Correlation that did exist before, Christianity, and what they would be drawing inspiration from, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I want to caution people because one thing that happens with historical Jesus studies, especially with Jesus myth studies, is they start out by saying, oh, well, Horus did this and Mithras did that, and they come up with all these parallels to Jesus that don't really play out, actually, and those aren't really a good argument to make for it. But the fact is, all these mystery faiths that were happening around the 1st century BC and the 1st century, all of them, it was a new religious movement, this idea of a personal savior God that people were, intimately connected with in a way that they weren't connected with the old pantheons of the Roman and the Greek gods. This was a new idea. And you can't really look at early Christianity without realizing that Christianity is the Jewish version of those mystery faiths. It's not that Christianity stole from the mystery faiths, or it was a copycat of them. It is a mystery faith, and that's what people fail to realize.
Well, if I remember correctly, didn't the Romans consider Christianity a segment of the Jewish faith?
And rightly so. I mean, it was a spin-off of Judaism.
I think the only time that, if I remember correctly reading, they took off the Sabbath day as being holy is when they cut it from being a Jewish religion.
Well, once you had the war with Rome between Jerusalem and Judea, rather, and the Roman Empire around the year AD 66 to 70, once that happened, Christianity immediately started distancing themselves from the Jews and saying, oh, we're not the Jews, those are the Jews, they're the bad guys. We love the Romans, the Romans are great. They tried to really ingratiate themselves with the Roman structure.
For the sake of clarification, when you reference the term mystery faith, what exactly are you referring to?
Yeah, I'm referring to this religious movement that was happening during the Hellenistic period, where before the way that religion worked in societies is they had a pantheon, and there was an official pantheon, and they had a god for everything, or at least like a top 10 of gods who handled most of the stuff that people were worried about. What started to give way from that was this thing called the mystery faith, which were these secret societies. They were religious societies where you'd have these rituals and these hidden, secret handshakes and whatnot, and all these levels of initiation to go and become personally connected with this savior god. And there were a whole slew of different savior gods, like Attis, like Mithras, like Isis. They mostly were retooled older gods that had been around for thousands of years. But this mystery faith business was a new spin on that. And it wasn't exclusive until Christianity came around. Christianity made it an exclusive, their mystery faith, an exclusive one. But you can catch even hints of this in the New Testament. For instance, talking about the Last Supper, Paul never calls it the Last Supper. He always calls it the Lord's Supper. And what's interesting about that is Christianity is not the first religion to have a Lord's Supper. And even in his own letters, he warns people, now, this is our Lord's Supper. You have to take our Lord's Supper. Don't go to their Lord's Supper. That's the cup of demons, if you take theirs. Because we only have one God and one Lord, one Kyria, Christ. And he uses mystery faith terms about being initiated and makes reference to ways of speaking that they use to talk about the difference between those who were in the inner circle and knew what was really happening and those who didn't, who were just babies to the faith and had to drink milk before they could eat meat, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So are you saying Christianity basically started off more along the lines of the Gnostic view as opposed to the, the
Orthodox, for lack of a better word?
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Well, I just got to the part where I needed. Well, the formation of Christianity was somewhat Hellenistic, where they had a super being and then, the subsect of deities, which they called angels, which did the exact same reference of all the other Greek gods. If you look at the Greek structure, you can see Zeus at the top and then gods below it, which was a combination of Jewish religion and Palestine. With Israel and Palestine.
Sure.
Well, if I remember correctly, wasn't the Hellenized Jewish religion what eventually became the Christian because the Jews did not have the underworld, the whole concept of an underworld or an afterlife until the Greeks and their whole Hellenistic, Hades and stuff.
Right.
When you die, you go to Hades, like kind of like the whole like in the story with Christians with the. Who's the guy at the heaven gates? Who is that guy?
St. Peter?
Yeah, St. Peter. Like St. Peter, while when you go to Hades, you see Chiron, the boatsman.
Right.
So it's kind of like the same kind of thing.
Well, it's a Hellenistic, which is like the same principle that the Greeks were. It means it's not monotheistic. It's you have other deities.
It's
but
henotheistic.
you just call them. Huh?
It's
over semantics, actually.
Yeah, but basically you're right. It's a plurality of gods, and no one would have said that there was just one god, and no one would have, begrudged you for going to some other temple and doing rituals to other gods too.
But yeah, the other ones that were popping up around were the mysteries of Atlas.
Atlas, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm bad with pronunciation.
No worries.
Isa and Orisis.
Isis and Horus.
Yes, and the Mithras.
Mithras, yeah.
The Jupiter Dolites. I can't even say these.
There were all a whole slew of these different deities, and almost every single country or people, culture in the Roman world had one of their own going on.
You mean kind of like they had like a pantheon deity which they associated with a certain location or town or something?
Well, there was that kind of thing going on too, but that's a separate movement. I mean, what happened during the Roman Empire is they would go to like the Celtic countries and say, okay, this god Coronos, that's really Zeus. This god.
Yeah, they just said your gods were different gods under different names, but
exactly.
But when they came to the Jews, they're like, when the Jews like, well, we only have one god. It's like, crap.
Right. Well, and what happened was this was a slightly different version of that because there were a lot of pagans who were really interested in Judaism. There was a lot of things about Judaism they found very attractive. And vice versa, there were a lot of Jews who were really attracted to the Hellenistic, the intellectual tradition of that. And so
new ideas. New ideas.
Right.
TruthSurge, you have anything to add to this? Crap.
I'm sitting in my computer, and you probably can't hear me in this from this vantage point.
Actually, we can.
Yeah, we hear you.
I mean, you can hear me, but not like good if I was standing in front of my microphone. But I was typing to Strife, who was trying to prod me into talking, and I told him I didn't
I told him I didn't want to just jump in and like be rude. And I don't have a headset mic, which sucks. So I can't sit at my computer and type to him and get back on that screen where I can see everyone. And I don't have my video camera turned on.
Well, I mean, it's not rude if you jump in. No one will...
So I'm not good at jumping in. So I told him I would just kind of be here unless somebody said, "Hey man, are you dead? Or are you awake?" Or
Well,
no,
yeah.
I don't have a lot to add to this particular
point.
Yeah,
point
'cause-
about the early mystery inputs to the early Christian religion.
Mhm.
I mean, I agree that those were part. I mean, they were just part of the landscape, and obviously Christianity soaked up some of that and blended into it and took some stuff and later stuff split off from it and like I guess David, I don't know David, but I just heard him talking. Like he said, it's not like there was a Christianity and it started absorbing things. It was like it kind of formed, like maybe similar to some of those other ones.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I get what you're saying, as in like the Christianity we know of today. Well, obviously today is not the Christianity that was there. It was a lot radically different, and
Yes.
over time, it reformed and revitalized itself until it finally became a form which became distinct, eventually forming either Orthodoxy or Catholicism or something like that, right?
Right.
Through the
And
centuries.
I just want to jump on that and say that not only is that the case, but I mean, even today, we don't have Christianity. We have Christianities. We have this whole, panoply of different Christianities. And it was exactly the same back then, before Christianity got official. There was nothing but all these different independent movements.
So it was like many cults of Christ, but only one. But the cult that got the most attention was the one that dominated, and thus it was kind of like the bigger ones swallowed up the smaller ones until
Absolutely. And even so, even with that going on, Christianity was still completely on the fringe for about the first 300 years of its existence. And if Rome hadn't started going down the tubes when it did, Christianity probably never would have come to the forefront, because as long as the Roman Empire was doing well, Christianity was just this crazy little fringe cult that nobody paid much attention to except slaves and women.
Wait, what?
They chose slaves from them.
As far as religions go, it was a complete bottom feeder according to ancient standards. For instance,
it wasn't that innovative.
It wasn't that. It was innovative in its own way, sure, but it wasn't. It wasn't getting a great big market share, if you will.
Of religion.
Of religious, yeah. A lot of people, even in the 2nd century, we've got letters from Pliny and from Trajan, and even though he is a governor, and even though he was the consul of Rome, which was basically the attorney general of the entire Roman Empire, number 2 man of the entire Roman Empire, he had never heard of Christians. So that says that they were completely socially microscopic, even 100 years or so into Christianity.
So they were like even less than the peasants.
Even less than Jehovah's Witnesses. It'd be like, it took them,
It would be like Raelians. It'd be like the Raelians. I never heard of the Raelians until I heard of them.
It took them hundreds of years just to even get to the level of minor cults in the Roman Empire. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
the Josephus reference, I believe, was referring to them as a pernicious cult.
Well, and that's a forgery. Correctly. That's a forgery.
Oh, I thought that was the part that wasn't, and the rest of it was a forgery.
Tacitus is the one who refers them as a pernicious cult.
Oh, okay. Thank you for the correction.
Yeah. Josephus there's a disputed mention of him in 2 places, and I argue in the book Nailed, that one's obviously a forgery. Nobody really argues that it's not a forgery. They just argue how much of it is a forgery. But I think it's very obvious it's a complete forgery because of the arguments I put forth in the book.
I mean, also the question of Christianity. Think of the region that this culture came from, right? Christianity developed around where the Jewish culture was, right?
Right. Well,
and the Jewish culture. Go ahead.
But not just in the Jewish culture. It was this combination. We talk about Judeo-Christianity, but we should call it Pagano-Judeo-Christianity, because it really was a blend of both these things. And it happened in places like Alexandria, Egypt, in Syria, in Rome, in Greece, all over the place. It didn't just, come snowballing down from Golgotha and spreading out, like a ripple. It popped up in all these different places around the same.
I mean, just think of the landscape itself. In a sense, it's like Constantinople. It's the crossroads of pretty much the old world. You know, if you go from Africa to Asia or anywhere, you're going to go through Israel or that region sometime or another.
Yeah.
So
especially if you're trying to conquer places.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also,
it's interesting.
Also, we have our first caller. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
We have Nicholas Ciccone calling in. Give me a second.
I just want to point this out real quick. You are right, David, that they wouldn't be as buff as they are now if the Roman Empire hadn't fallen. Because who was it, the one that adopted the Christian to make it the
Constantine?
Yeah, Constantine.
Right.
If the Romans had continued, they would have stopped the Christians, and then Constantine would have not been able to adopt that because they wouldn't have been as much of a force, even if there was minute people left.
Right. And there were lots of reasons that Constantine picked Christianity and not some other religion. And I talk about that in the book as well. There's all these evolutionary advantages and disadvantages that Christianity had. And for 300 years, they were completely at a disadvantage compared to other religions like Mithraism. But once Rome started going down the tubes and Constantine was looking for, a nice power base, Christianity had everything he needed.
Wasn't it because Christianity offered power to the people in a sense?
Well, not so much that. I mean, he was not a Democrat by any means. He was a pure power player.
Maybe I misspoke. I mean, not power to the people, but it appealed to the masses.
Yes, absolutely.
I used the wrong words, but it appealed to the masses. It didn't appeal to the people.
And he actually was playing both sides against each other when he was emperor. I mean, yes, he was the first Christian emperor, but he was also a lifelong pagan emperor, and he was deified as the sun god when he died, just like all the other ones. It wasn't until after Constantine that Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire.
And with that, Nicholas Ciccone, welcome to the show. What would you like to ask the panel?
Where do I start? David, sorry, Mr. Fitzgerald, you said there were problems. You had heard some of the arguments for the authenticity or inauthenticity of the Josephus passage, and yes. I was wondering which arguments you were referring to.
Well, I'll give you just a couple right off the bat. For one, the passage itself is an interpolation into the text. It doesn't fit in with what the rest of the chapter is talking about.
Well,
the first line of the next passage that follows it says, "At this time there was another great misfortune that hit the Jews." And it's like, well, we just had a commercial for Jesus. There wasn't a great misfortune there. But if you skip that back to the first one, then it is a great misfortune. But here's the clincher. The thing that is the most, I mean, again, historians don't argue that it's forged. They argue whether it was a complete forgery or not a complete forgery.
I agree. But I'm not disputing that.
Right. But here's what's indisputable is the fact this thing was not quoted by anyone for the first 300 years of its life until Eusebius of Caesarea.
Actually, there is probably good reason for that. I mean, I've seen actually. What?
Why would you say there's good reason for that? Because Josephus was the most popular, second to the Bible, for early Christian fathers, and we have dozens.
They were talking about a lot of other stuff. They were not talking about the early decades of the church. Often they were referring to things like Old Testament history. I mean, actually, there's a thing called on Tertullian.org that talks about Josephus and how he's cited by the early church fathers. And basically, when you read what the early church fathers were doing with Josephus, they were basically talking about things relating to the Old Testament and how that held up to history.
Well, I agree. But here's the thing. They also used him for proof texts on people like John the Baptist. And in fact,
that was yes, that's Origen.
Like Origen.
Yeah, that's Origen. That's Origen. Yes.
Yeah, Origen even goes forth to say in his book Contra Celsus, yes, Jesus did all these amazing, wonderful things, but what other source do we have for them except the Gospels? And that's from someone who supposedly
can you give me a source for that? Whoa.
I'm sorry. That's the thing that makes that so damning is that Origen is the one who owned the book.
Which passage so I can look it up myself?
Sorry, I'm sorry, I can't hear you when you're talking over me.
He wants a source of where it states what you're describing.
I'll give it to you right here. It's right here in the book.
Yeah, just type it out because I'm breaking up over here.
Okay, I'll find it for you. But basically, in my book Nailed, I mentioned that Origen says of all, yes, Jesus did these wonderful things, but where else can we find sources for it except in the Gospels? And what makes that so damning is that Origen is his copy of Josephus is the book that Eusebius of Caesarea 200 years later, after 300
actually,
years.
I think you might be confusing the Origen passage with another passage because if I recall, James McGrath pointed something out to you where he said, sorry, go right ahead. I interrupt.
Yeah, let me just finish that. His copy of that book is what finally wound up being in the hands of Eusebius of Caesarea, who's the first person to quote this passage, and he starts quoting it, exclusively. He's the first person to close it many times. But we've got 16 or 17 different early church fathers who we have their commentaries on Josephus and what they used him for. Nobody even comes close to doing anything like this. And again, we get quotes from them saying that there is no source for anything outside the Gospels.
At the same time, suppose they had quoted Josephus. What would Josephus likely to have said about Jesus, if anything at all, knowing that he did not agree with knowing that he didn't agree with the perception that Jesus was the Christ or something like that.
Well, he also didn't agree that John the Baptist was.
He would have slumped him in with the rest of the apocalypticists that were going around in the same exact period and saying whatever shit was popular at the time. He wouldn't have really taken somebody like Jesus seriously. So, I mean, it doesn't surprise me why people would quote, because it's just not going to be a really ephemeral detail. Nobody quoted Tacitus either. Tacitus.
Well, that's not true. Christians preserved Tacitus in a large extent because of what he had to say about early Christianity. Christians were desperate to get any kind of preservation of anything they even thought mentions Jesus or John the Baptist.
If I can cut in for one moment, please. I was actually going to ask TruthSurge, was this one of the areas that you covered when you were doing your research for excavating the empty tomb?
Well, one of the things, just so I can clear on what he did cover, was actually where people talked about Mark, and essentially where the same, if they did have it, they would have mentioned it, because the passages 9 through 20 were specifically mentioned to not be there. And essentially, if you're gonna, the people who were of the church, who, if they saw it, they would have talked about it, which they did. They actually talked about rare gospels having verses 9 through 20, but the most of them didn't. So even if they disagree, they're still going to talk about it in terms of, well, this is why we disagree with this, and this is why you can discount it.
And in fact, that's how we know what we know about, for instance, the heresies that were going on in early Christianity and the early counter-apologetics is because of how they are mentioned by early Christian writers. And in some cases, those are our only sources at all.
So, TruthSurge, do you want to add stuff to this?
No, I agree with David that there's no way I can believe that even a watered-down Testimonium Flavianum existed in the original Josephus. Wait a minute. Can I finish his sentence, please?
Yeah, let him finish.
Let him finish.
Just at least one sentence, and then when I put the period on the end of it, I'll shut up, and anybody that wants can talk. But there's no way I can believe that even a watered-down mention of the gospel Jesus existed in the original Josephus writings if no one made mention of it for even 200 years, including Origen, who quotes from Josephus and anybody else that would have had it. I can't believe that no Christian father wouldn't have jumped on that
Yep.
and just said, here it is. Oh my God, Josephus even mentions Jesus. I'm not talking about I'm not talking about the, you know what I'm saying? I'm not talking about the blown up version. I'm saying if there was a watered down version.
Yes.
So now I'll shut up. I'm just saying I agree because it doesn't seem as plausible to think it would have been the other way.
It doesn't seem plausible at first, but well, sometimes you.
Well, can I just put it this way? It's essentially you have to jump through more hoops to reach that conclusion that aren't there.
Well, no, you just need to. Okay, all the arguments I've seen. Actually, I have Josephus, and reading it contrary to what Mr. Fitzgerald is saying, it actually does work in with the rest of the passage. It just enumerates the problems that the Jews are facing. It has Josephine language.
Where in that at all does it talk about the problems the Jews are facing in that passage? It says in the next line, at this time another sad calamity hit. Where in any part of this testimonium do you find a sad calamity by Jewish standards?
Well, okay, you have a person whom a lot of people obviously like, and he's dying. That's the...
Yeah, and the person who's supposed to be writing this is one of the guys who killed him. He's an Orthodox Jew saying this. How would they consider that a sad calamity? If you go to the passage before it, where it's talking about Pilate having a massacre in Jerusalem, yeah, that's a sad calamity, sure. But
actually, there's another version of the passage. I think it was quoted in... I didn't find Alice Wheely's argument against it very convincing. Apparently Richard Carrier does, but...
and I do as well.
Yeah, and that's frightening. But anyway, the thing is that she says that there's this passage by quoted in the 10th century that actually omits the presence of the Jews and says that Pilate was responsible.
You're talking about
that actually that flows with the rest of the passage. But actually, even if hold on, even if you keep the other people in the principal men among us, you still have Pilate.
Wait a minute. Excuse me 1 second here. I need to ask one question here.
Yep.
In that passage, if I remember correctly, it refers to Jesus rising again on the third day and all this, right?
Yeah, that's obviously an interpolation. The thing about Christian interpolation...
so that's not part... Okay,
hold on.
I would just like you to establish which part you're saying is not an interpolation. That's all I'm wondering.
Well, there is some disagreement, but...
There's considerable disagreement.
What?
Please let Nick continue.
It's not as big as you think, but yeah, there's some disagreement. But the fact that there's some disagreement doesn't mean there's no agreement whatsoever. There's a big difference. Okay, so 13 Heathens, you said something like the passage, and when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men among us, had condemned him to the cross, that might be totally authentic. I've seen good arguments for why principal men amongst us is Josephine language, but even if I'm suspicious of it. But when Pilate, that obviously is not an interpolation. I've seen it fits in with the rest of the passage. A lot of the passage has Josephine language. If you throw that out, you throw out the entire text critical method. No,
you don't. That's ridiculous. That's a ridiculous statement.
Oh, it's ridiculous.
Someone could write like Josephus if they wanted to.
Absolutely.
If they had a copy of his stuff.
But
yeah,
the fact is, Josephine scholars don't agree with what Nicholas is saying here about it being Josephine language.
Here's what you're doing when you do that. You're making first off, you're making an unfalsifiable hypothesis. Second, these are Christian interpolations, okay? The interpolations are going to stick out like a sore thumb. I'm just saying. I mean,
but here's the thing. Let's say for argument's sake, I granted you that. Why on earth did no one notice this for 300 years?
Why on earth did nobody notice this? Because nobody really gave a shit.
That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous.
Okay, no, actually, it's not ridiculous.
No, it is, Nicholas. Because Josephus was quoted by early Christian fathers exclusively and extensively. To say they weren't interested in what he had to
Yeah,
say is just ridiculous.
excuse me, David, I just gave you a citation that debunks that idea. They were focusing on Old Testament stuff when they referred to Josephus. First off,
Again,
it's not
one
a
at
lie.
a time. One at a time. First David, then Nicholas. Please keep it civil.
Go ahead, Nicholas.
No, you go ahead. I'm babbling.
Here's what I want to say.
Mm-hmm.
We could argue, and it does get argued back and forth on how much of it and which parts of it are legitimate and which aren't. But no one who argues for a legitimate testimonium can explain why it was ignored for 300 years when for 300 years we have extensive writings from those same church fathers going over, doing commentaries on Josephus.
Okay, let me also put it this way.
Not just
in 300 years, you have generations of people. So in 300 years, there wasn't one generation that commented on the existence of that?
Not a
because they would be fine.
David, please understand this, okay? The reason why those people are you have to think about why those people are quoting Josephus, okay? They're quoting him because of trying to talk about historical stuff behind veridical cadence. You go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Just the whole thought that this statement from Josephus that would very definitely say that Jesus was not only a historical person, but possibly who Christians claim that he is, would not be mentioned by the church fathers for 300 years is the death knell for the authenticity of the passage. Pass up that opportunity.
Stop. There's reason why they don't
guys, can I pause for a moment because TruthSurge
I think I'm being very clear here. I don't see. Go ahead. I'm being rude.
Yeah, I was gonna say TruthSurge wants to get his camera working, and I'll start the call again. So sorry, people, because for some reason he cannot find the camera button on his screen. Don't know why. So I'm gonna.
You want me to put my camera on?
No, I'm talking about TruthSurge.
Okay, good.
Doesn't really matter, but yeah. So I'll restart the call and we'll continue the show in just 5 seconds. So wait 5 seconds and video call. Crap. Ethan, you there?
Yeah.
Can you do me a favor and video call the group?
Sure.
Okay.
How's this?
Is it working, TruthSurge?
I don't know. I can't see me. Can you see me?
No, I think it's your camera.
I cannot see. That's weird.
I've got a really long Gandalf beard and a Gene Simmons airbrush T-shirt.
We just see your picture still.
I can't see you, or can you guys see me? Or
I can't see half of anyone. I see the realist. No wait, now I see Caden. Okay, let's get back to topic. Because I think it's your camera, though. TruthSurge. How about this talking point? The error among the accounts. Is that another point we can go on, David?
Are you talking about the Gospels themselves? The
Yes.
contradictions in the Gospels?
Yeah.
We could talk about that.
Okay.
Okay. In fact, there are contradictions in the Gospels. There are reasons why there are contradictions in the Gospels, and they're not often. Jesus didn't exist. So go ahead.
Well, let's talk about that then. Actually, let's talk about this. What are our sources for information about Jesus?
What are our sources for? I'd hate to play burden tennis. I'd hate to appear like I'm playing burden tennis with you, but I'd like to throw this back at you. What are our sources about first century Palestine?
Gotcha. Well, I'm just talking about Jesus right now, not just First century.
Well, our sources on Jesus are currently the ancient Christian writings from the first century.
Specifically, who are you talking though? I mean,
the what?
Specifically, who are we talking about when you say those?
The ancient Christian writings. Well, who else?
Let me back up. So what I'm putting out to you is that all our information about Jesus essentially boils down to 4 Christian documents, and that's the 4 Gospels.
Well, actually, there might be a little more than that if you count Q, but also...
well, no one's ever found Q, and I don't think Q existed.
I don't think Mark Goodacre's rebuttal to Q is very convincing.
Well, that's another point we disagree on, but all right. Well, let's since no one's found Q, let's not worry about Q. Let's worry about what we do have.
Well, actually, Q gets some mention in early church documents. There's an idea that...
But just because it gets mentioned doesn't mean we have it. We have to work with what we have, not with what we think exists.
It tells us that it might have existed, so that's it.
Wait, hang on a second. There's no early church documents. There's no early church documents that mention Q. How could there be?
Well, actually, yeah, they mention a thing called the Logia, and that's in Papias, quoted by Eusebius, Natchez, Papias' language. So
the Logia Dominici, yeah. But we don't know that was Q either. We don't know what Q was. We don't even know there was a Q.
That doesn't prevent...
I'm just saying that's a fact. That's a fact.
Let's just go on with the talk.
Here's what I am telling you.
Because let's just focus on what we have.
For all practical extents and purposes, it boils down to 4 books, the 4 Gospels in the New Testament.
Okay, fine. I'll grant you that.
Okay. What do we know about who and when and why those were written? And this is what I want to put.
Well, actually, we know quite. It seems like we know quite a bit. Matthew is obviously written for a very Jewish audience.
And who do we think Matthew was?
You go ahead.
And who do you think Matthew was?
Matthew, I don't know who wrote him. I think the attribution to him is mistaken. That should not be a problem.
Well, it is a problem if we're saying that this is eyewitness accounts or based on eyewitness acthere because
you can still.
How familiar are you with what's called the synoptic problem?
Well, there are other ways of detecting eyewitness stuff besides, their names are this or this. I mean,
this is TruthSurge's ball court.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So TruthSurge, do you want to cover this into why the authorship is not a trustworthy witness account? As far as
I'm familiar with the arguments as to why the traditional authorship is not trustworthy. It was attributed later on. It's probably the result of wanting there to be eyewitness accounts. I mean, I've read Crossan and other people, so sorry. I'm familiar with the arguments, so go ahead.
Okay. Well, from a very simple standpoint, none of them claim to be eyewitnesses at all. None of them are written in the style of an eyewitness.
The synoptic problem with that. Richard Bauckham has a great analysis of that. He actually laid out why they are eyewitness accounts, and I actually think that argument might be convincing. We also don't have any idea that they also do match well with.
I believe that somebody asked TruthSurge what his research had come up with.
Yeah, TruthSurge, would you care to enlighten us?
I'm just waiting for like a lull in the...
I know, that's why I keep kind of nudging you into the conversation.
I don't know, just how I was raised. I'm not really good at interrupting somebody in the middle of a sentence, I guess.
Well, TruthSurge, you just have to put in the chat because we'll see it and we'll.
Well, the problem is I'm standing in the middle of the room, so I'm not at my keyboard either.
Oh.
So I'm in front of a regular recording microphone because I do voiceover, and this is the only one I've got. It's a stupid thing. I don't have my computer won't accept. It doesn't have my audio card doesn't have an audio thing for like a headset mic, so I'm stranded here in the middle of the room. No, I think. See, it sounds like people are wanting to like put all their money on one piece of the puzzle, and it's not that at all. I mean, if you've watched that little section, I'm sure you're recalling it when you think about this part, that whole section of my video series where I go into why the Gospels are not reliable as witnesses.
Do you mean
even if, in other words, even if we said right off the bat, let's assume they were eyewitnesses. That whole section of my video series shows that they would be thrown out instantly in any court today because they violate the federal rules of evidence. I cover that extensively in that video series. But
this is the this is the late first, early second century, and
there's many reasons. Let me just give you one. If I was an eyewitness, I would not copy a previous account 90% verbatim.
Thank you.
Hello?
Thank you? Whoa.
I mean, I would not do that.
It's quite common. Actually, I think Richard Carrier has an article about Josephus where he, interestingly enough, it's the one where he tries to debunk the sense for anything. Actually, he talks about he talks about how actually Josephus copies off of some people, and you can tell right where he's copying off them.
Let me stop you, because what you're describing is him describing Luke relying on Josephus.
No. I'm not. No, it's not that. It's actually another author. It's his account. It's Josephus's accounts of Herod.
Oh, talking about the sources that Josephus used.
Yes.
Like Justus of Tiberias and Nicholas of Damascus. Yes. Yeah.
I mean, historians you can find. From what I've seen at least, and I haven't seen as much as David here, but the thing is that you can trace back the sources of this stuff, and it's. I don't know. I don't see how that's really a big problem.
So are you? If you may, actually, are you?
Stop you there. Wait. When you say tracing down the sources of this stuff, what are we talking about now? Are you talking about the sources of the Gospels, what their sources were?
No, I'm talking about just historians in general, early historians.
Because one other thing Richard Carey has pointed out is that even by, and he's not the first or the only one to do this, but even by ancient standards, Luke is not operating as a historian according to even ancient standards of history. He's a shitty historian even by ancient standards. And
I don't buy his argument that he's copying off Josephus. I think the stuff he points out is rather trivial and not really conclusive.
Let's establish this though. Let's establish this though. When was Luke written, most likely, and when was Josephus written, most likely?
Most people have narrowed it down to between, I think, 80 and 95 CE.
And I would argue that there's no way in hell it could have written any time before the years 93 or 94, simply because of his reliance on Josephus. And when you read,
okay, for those,
you read the arguments for it, I don't see how anybody objectively looking at
it disagreed. His arguments, David, they're not very good. I mean, he says at one point, okay, well, obviously, if in order to make this mistake, Luke would have had to have been misreading Josephus. What? No, that doesn't make any sense.
I'm sorry, but every point where there's contact between the two, and there are multiple points of contact between the two,
there are a lot of points of contact between
Luke is using the same information in a haphazard way. Josephus has more exhaustive treatment of the information. It's in the right context, and it's coincidentally in the same order as Josephus, and in the same categories as Josephus. For instance, I'll just give you for instance, Luke happens to mention all three of the rebels, the would-be messiahs that Josephus happens to mention in there. Even though Josephus tells us there were dozens at this time, those are the only ones he mentions, Luke mentions them, and he even gets them in the wrong order. He has Gamaliel talking about revolutions that happened 10 years after.
I'm familiar with that. He mixes up Theudas with what?
Exactly.
Yeah. I don't
see arguments like that show. I mean, and there's many arguments like that. It's not just one or two trivial points. I mean, there's a consistent pattern of Luke relying on these points of information from
to be
Josephus,
honest,
but getting it wrong. That's how we know that it's Luke ripping off Josephus and not the other way around. One of the many ways.
Okay, to be honest, I have not read it in full.
Hang on, I'm losing you.
But it was just,
Hold on, can you repeat that?
Take a look at it again and
You're
Nicholas,
getting-
can you
you're
repeat?
echoing.
Can you please repeat that for David because he lost it?
Yeah, there was a motorcycle.
Yeah.
Wait. Is everyone okay with their audio quality? Because I think something's wrong.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you, but does everyone hear everyone else? Okay, just check.
I'm going to lost Nick. No one hears
I'm
me.
hearing a few glitches on some certain people.
I think it's 13 Heathens because he's hosting the call. I'm going to recall the call since TruthSurge can't exactly use his camera. So...
Yeah, that and frankly, my internet connection speed isn't the greatest, and that might be a factor.
Yeah, so sorry for the interruption again. Be back in 3 seconds. And... get off the call! Thank you.
There we go.
Okay,
I'm
now
here.
the feed's a lot better.
Yeah, my connection speed's horrible. I was questioning it to begin with, but...
Okay, so David, oh wait, we just lost David.
Hmm.
Maybe that's why. I lost.
Look, I need to be honest, it's nice to be on the Lying Ghost show, but to be honest, it's not really my thing. So I might, I'll see where it's going tomorrow. I'm not dodging a question. It's just that I kind of have better things to do right now. So if it's possible, have a good time on the call, and I'll just see how you guys are all doing in the. Tomorrow. Check out my link to Tertullian.org. It actually deals with that claim that Josephus was somehow.
Would you like me to post? Would you care to post it in the Vaughn Live?
I think I did. Let me check. Crap, my Skype is freezing up. Damn it. Okay, let me just. Okay, let me just find this Tertullian.
I did it. I already did it.
Yeah,
Josephus and the Ante-Nicene Fathers. All the citations. Yep, that's it. That would be it.
Okay, so you're heading out?
What?
You're heading out?
Yeah, I might. Nice talking to you, David. Hopefully we'll chat again sometime.
You too, Nicholas.
Let me just, I'll have another look at, okay, here's the thing. I'll have another look at Carrier's article. I'm not sure if, okay, he named 3 messiahs, and he named them all in the wrong order. Well, actually, Josephus names, he does seem to name more than 3, but actually, I'll have another look. So thanks anyway. Bye.
Fair enough.
But also that Luke, really does borrow a lot of things and then gets them completely different than anyone else. Yeah, so...
Also, to note, we have another caller.
No.
Establishing that as a common pattern with Luke is actually not that hard, so...
Not at all. And the other thing I wanted to say is if you get to the synoptic problem, what the synoptic problem is that Matthew and Luke are clearly ripping off Mark. Even though Matthew was supposedly an eyewitness and an apostle, he's stealing his story from a guy who wasn't even an apostle. It's ridiculous when you take the official story at face value.
All you have to do is just compare them at
absolutely.
You
and
find
the funny thing is they're either in lockstep, word for word, verbatim plagiarism, or they're completely opposite, going off from some directions.
Welcome to the show, Polymath. Can you please mute your feed? Yeah. So what would you like to ask the panel?
Well, I was thinking about that little bit I was listening to Bart Ehrman. I assume everyone here knows who he is, but
sure.
Yeah. If you read Matthew 27 and you see that at the time of the crucifixion, all the graves in Jerusalem open up and there's this giant zombie invasion, and
exactly.
nobody writes this down, even the Gospels that come later.
Exactly.
Luke doesn't write this down, but this is somehow mentioned to some degree in the Gospel of Nicodemus, which comes hundreds of years later.
Right.
So that sort of inconsistency, I don't understand how. I mean, if these are supposed to be reliable texts, why would that sort of inconsistency exist at all?
Right. And it's even worse than that, because he also describes things like major earthquakes hitting Jerusalem at the same time, supernatural darkness. And what's worse is all these Gospels, as you say, they don't even the other Gospels don't pick up on it. But the parts they do agree on aren't just agreement. It's not just eyewitness accounts that happen to conflict. I mean, to correspond. They're word for word cut and pasted from each other.
Yeah.
So when they talk about being, complementary, that's completely farcical. And when they talk about being, the differences prove that it's true. It's like they're either in lockstep or they're completely ramified in these opposite directions.
Yeah.
I got a certain point. I want to certain direction. I want this discussion to go.
Sure.
The most famous point we hear, I think even everyone would, the tomb, the empty tomb, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What exactly
Craig.
is the significance of this tomb in Jerusalem? I think it was, or was it Gallifrey, or what was it?
It was in Jerusalem.
Gallifrey?
Oh wait, I'm thinking of Doctor Who.
You're thinking of Dr.
Sorry.
What was it? What was it? He was
Galilee?
Galilee.
Yeah,
It wasn't
Galilee.
in Galilee. It wasn't in Galilee. Yeah, Galilee's way to the north of Jerusalem.
Was it Bethlehem?
No, Bethlehem's slightly out of town. It was outside Jerusalem or slightly inside. The fact is, we don't know where this tomb was, and there's multiple tombs today that all claim to be Jesus' tomb.
Yeah,
Where's
it's
some of that
essentially
confusion?
to go, Jesus is there. All right, let's start a tomb.
There you go. And it pretty much was about that shaky, too, because it wasn't until the pilgrimage business took off that all of a sudden, we discovered his tomb. We discovered his house in Bethlehem. We discovered, this and that, places, associated with him. We don't have that for hundreds of years.
Yeah, didn't they start at like 400 AD? That's when they actually started picking the tomb.
Right around that 3rd and 4th century, yeah. And again, once it became a popular religion and Constantine's mother, Helena, went to the Holy Land, that's when you see things like the True Cross showing up and martyrs and the whole pilgrimage business getting kicked off.
Mm-hmm. Let's establish this. In the same time when Jesus is supposed to be around, they did honor the dead and respect the dead, correct?
Wait, when you say that, what do you mean he honored the dead?
Like a restoration of tombstones, like they leave gifts and
I mean, isn't that?
I thought that was after Constantine. I'm sorry. I thought that was after.
Wait.
Constantine.
I got a question about this. Was it this might be a little bit off, but was it common practice with the Hebrews for them to honor their dead, or was it not?
They built ossuaries because of their belief in where they would store the bones of the dead because of their beliefs about the resurrection at the end of the world. They didn't actually have. Well, actually, there was some syncretism between some Jews, and some did believe that bodily resurrection was possible. I think there were the Essenes.
Well, you got to remember, during the 1st century, there were so many branches of Judaism that you can't even describe Judaism as being the same thing. It's never been more diverse than it was in the 1st century. There's about 30 different sects of Judaism that we know about.
Well, what I'm trying to establish is that people do visit grave sites to honor the dead and that time period is what I'm trying to establish.
Yeah,
because
this is TruthSurge butting in. I touched on that in that video series, Excavating the Empty Tomb, and even James Dunn, a very well-known Christian theologian with several degrees, he readily admits that during that time that the Jews were venerating the tombs of their ancestors.
Yes.
There's no question that people were visiting the resting place, whether it had their bones or whether they had decayed. That's not the point. The point was this was where I put this person, or this was where this person was claimed to be, and therefore those people that were affected, family members, friends, or people who respected them, they would go to that location physically and do some sort of worship, veneration, lay a flower, say a prayer, that kind of thing. So it wasn't as if it wasn't going on. That's the
But
point.
isn't that kind of against the whole Jewish Mosaic laws?
To touch
No.
dead bodies. It's to touch dead bodies. I think
Yeah.
That would make them unclean.
Yeah.
Yes.
Actually, more to the point, the question is, we don't have any evidence that Christians were venerating Jesus' tomb until the 3rd or 4th century. Before then, there's no sign of it. There's no rituals, anything.
So I was establishing first that they had that in there as a practice, and that's what we're establishing first. That even at that time they had it as a practice. The next thing we establish is that because they referred to Jesus as a rabbi, wouldn't they have been more encouraged to do it even more so than they would if he was just a regular schmo?
Yeah, I take your point, that there should have been something of that nature. Sure.
And that's what I'm saying, is that it's more, if he did exist, they would have not just done it a little bit, but they would have mentioned it. They would have wrote, hey, I visited Jesus' tomb, and they would have been talking about it because he was referred to as a rabbi. He was referred to as someone who was a teacher and that kind of thing.
Someone who had influence among the people,
Right.
I guess you could say.
And by the same token, one argument you can say against that is that after the war with Rome, Jerusalem was pretty much Mad Max country. I mean, everyone was kicked out of Jerusalem. So it's
could it be because this person appealed to the peasants who were most likely, illiterate?
I read somewhere that actually during that time period within the Roman Empire, there was a high level of literacy among some of the lower castes.
That's not true at this time.
Okay, that's what I was.
Yeah, I mean, like Israel's like the Wild West, I think you could call it, like, right? Would Israel?
Yeah, pretty much only about 10% of the population of Judea could even be expected to be literate at this time.
I
think I lost you.
Outlines that I think the number was about 2% in Jerusalem could read, or something, and then a smaller, or something like that, and a smaller percentage could write words or write a sentence. And then again, so when you look at the Gospels, you're reading the works of very highly educated Greek-speaking authors. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, and that's a good point. One I was trying to make about our sources for the Gospels, that whoever wrote them were not Aramaic illiterate fishermen. They were theologically advanced. They were educated in Greek culture and made references to Greek classics. Even the Koine Greek in Mark's Gospel is very artfully done, so that
that's what Bart Ehrman said.
He's speaking in a very folksy way, and yet he's clearly not a hillbilly writing the stuff.
He's at least upperclassman.
Right. He's trying to sound like Matlock, but he's actually very, very well educated, and he's making these sophisticated literary analogies and allusions.
So would you say because we don't exactly know who wrote those Gospels, we just wrote Greek names on them like Luke, Mark, and such.
And they didn't just put the names on them during the 2nd century. Those were chosen very deliberately because they wanted to one-up other factions who had their own Gospels and say, oh yeah, well, your Gospel's good, but ours is from Matthew, ours is from Peter, In fact, the Gospel according to Peter was more popular than our Gospel of Mark. We're lucky that we still have the Gospel of Mark, in fact.
But it wasn't written by a guy named Peter. I mean,
no. The names. Yeah. I think, if I remember correctly, they came on later, right?
Absolutely. If you look at all the Gospels, not only are they all anonymous, but they all are written in third person. None of them claim to be written by eyewitnesses, and they all contain giveaways that they're being written generations after the fact. For instance, Luke starts out his gospel by saying, so many people are writing gospels these days. It seemed good to me to go back to the sources and see how this story was handed down to us from those who had been there in the beginning. And yet, that's clearly a lie, because all he does is rip off Matthew and Mark's gospel.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to, just to bring it back just a little bit, I just want to make this point. Jesus would have been, if he did exist, would have been Jewish, so the Jewish people would have eviscerated the tomb, but also that since Christianity did borrow some parts from the Jewish faith, that would definitely be something positive that would be taken as well. That kind of a ritual towards the dead and honoring the dead.
Well, yes,
So
but the difference with the whole Jesus thing is, like what I was saying earlier with the whole with my question about isn't that against the Mosaic laws? Like when worshiping the dead become idolatry, and kind of the Christian idea of Jesus is kind of the dead becoming an idolatry, right?
Well, that Christian
it was a
stuff.
blasphemy for some Jews, sure.
I mean, isn't that the Ten Commandments?
Well, they still like anoint the
worshiping,
body.
it's
and that kind of
veneration.
stuff.
Well, no, but I'm saying when can veneration become, it pretty much, it's not that far a line from that.
Well, the difference between Jesus is that he wasn't just being venerated as a man, he was considered to be the Christ. He was an actual, incarnation of God, if you will.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I mean.
So it would be equivalent
they used
to
the exact
worshiping.
same term for him as the other mystery faiths use for their gods.
Yeah. So it would be essentially like going to Yahweh's, going to an altar for Yahweh and then doing the stuff there. It doesn't matter if you do it as many times as you want because it's representation of that God. So it wouldn't be thought of as blasphemy because you're still worshiping the same thing.
I mean, this might be a little bit off topic, but if I remember correctly, wasn't the Jewish religion to go to the temple and worship Yahweh, right? I mean, right?
Yes.
But if you have an incarnate of your deity, then it's okay. It removes the stigmata of.
Yes. While when the temple was destroyed, where do you worship said deity?
Right.
So I mean, wouldn't Christianity like kind of, in a sense, like be prepared for this sudden like, oh, the altar's gone. What do we do? Let's worship at this guy's empty tomb.
You're making a great point, and some people think that's actually why the Gospel of Mark was written in the first place, in reaction to the destruction of the temple and the war with Rome.
Is that why pretty much you see in that story? I mean, I never read the book, but I've heard of this part. Like Jesus said, the temple crashed down or something like that. The temple will be destroyed.
TruthSurge actually covered this in detail, so he might have more about this specific topic.
Yeah, TruthSurge. Would you care to enlighten us about that part? Because and my family's Jewish, so I really have no idea.
I'm not exactly sure what you're asking.
I'm asking about the part when...
Okay, so remember you're dating the Book of Mark when you did that series?
Yeah, and I think I dated it a little too early, but not,
No, that's fine. But
a few years earlier. But yeah. The whole idea of... Now, here's the thing I was thinking just while y'all were talking about that. It's like we're almost speculating now, what if Jesus existed? But in the reality, he didn't, and that's why there was no tomb.
Right.
That's why there was no tomb, and that's why there was no Christian veneration. There was no tomb. There was no belief in an earthly Jesus until the first gospel and the second and third gained wide enough circulation to orthodoxy, started becoming a thing over the previous more Gnostic versions, right?
Well, that's the point I was trying to prove.
So,
if he did exist, what would happen?
Well, then you'd see if he existed like the gospel said, you'd see tomb veneration from day one. Everybody that went to his tomb and saw that he had risen, the disciples, the women, the family members, Joseph of Arimathea, all those people knew where he was buried.
Yeah.
Yep. That's exactly my.
And that's kind of like the veneration you would see with Muhammad rising to heaven with the Rock of Dome in Jerusalem.
Dome of the Rock. Yeah.
Yeah, Dome of Rock.
Yeah, absolutely. You're making a great point. There's so many things that would be differently in just the way the first century went out and just the way early Christian scriptures came together that would be different even if there had just been a guy named Jesus. Just a guy. Yeah.
Richard Carrier, and I've heard Richard Carrier and John Shelby Spong read the Koine Greek from the 1 Corinthians 15. And they both illustrate this idea that the earliest disciples didn't believe that Jesus had had risen as a physical body, because they talk about Jesus exchanging one body from another for another.
Right. Spiritual body of Christ, where he talks about the body was like a seed, and the spiritual body would grow out of that. So some of the early lines of Christianity clearly believed something along that lines, just as they believed that God had adopted Jesus at his baptism, that Jesus had been a normal human being up until that point. You know, he wasn't a pre-existent figure with the Father.
But let me interject one thing. If we read Paul's epistles, generally the ones that are mostly agreed upon as being Paul and not later ones, then we can say, what if the early Christians did believe in a heavenly Jesus and not a guy that was on earth, but more of not only is God up in heaven and angels are up in heaven, but if suddenly from the Old Testament, Paul and a few other Jews started seeing, quote unquote, a Messiah, and then it turned into, today I have begotten, and then they turned into a son of God, where do you think that son of God would be? In heaven, not on earth. So if we go with that idea and look at 1 Corinthians 15, right, then we interpret it as if they're talking about Jesus is descending from the upper level of heaven to a lower level of heaven, and Jesus takes on a physical form. Paul almost explicitly tells us this in several places where he says Jesus took the form, morphe, right, in Greek?
Yes.
The form of a man. He makes it very clear that he's not going all the way to human. He takes the form of a man, and Paul makes it clear that there is a spiritual flesh and an earthly flesh. So he believes that there are two different kinds of flesh, and that's where I would go with this whole thing, is that Paul's not talking about Jesus physically human on earth, and then he goes up into heaven. He's talking about, well, if Jesus took on a flesh, and then he went back to spirit up in the level, the high level with God, we too can take on Jesus' spiritual flesh, even though we've only got human flesh now. Will be changed like he is in the ascended form. You see what I'm saying?
Let me see if I understand this correctly. It sounds like you're saying that Jesus was like the guy from Avatar, in a sense. He descended down to Earth, right?
Yes.
Then different level of heaven.
Not necessarily.
This what we're talking about now is the ascension of Isaiah.
Yeah.
Is actually what we're going into.
Okay. Yeah.
Can we hold on a minute here? Hold on, can we hold on a minute here? Vertical Cadence has a question.
Okay. Yes, just a quick question for David here. Right, so the early church saw that it's basically just a myth, basically, or that Christ was in heaven or something and not a physical being.
That's what it seems to be when you read all the writings from the Christians before the Gospels were written, that first generation with Paul and pre-Pauline. It seems like their Jesus was a spiritual figure that they found it speaking to them from the Old Testament scriptures, the Jewish Septuagint and the ancient Hebrew texts.
Right.
They talk about the spirit of the Son and the Son of God being the same thing. That he's speaking to them from Midrash, from what they pull out of the Old Testament.
This might be a little bit of a speculation, but it's. Oh, go ahead, Caden.
Sure. Just one more quick question for you. When did this view shift and why?
And here's the thing. For me, I think it shifted when the guy who we call Mark wrote his gospel. And it seems to me that was written as an allegory. It seems very obvious to me that it was written as an allegory because there's so many different layers of symbolic things going on in there that couldn't be really physically true, but have a real strong symbolic resonance in them. And there's many historians who have commented on those different ones. I mentioned the Barabbas incident in my book that Richard Carrier and others have brought up.
I saw your talk on that. That was really good.
Yeah. And so for me, it seems like that the early Christians were people who saw these messages and speaking to them, and everything they argue about their Christ is according to scriptures. They say, oh, we know that Jesus was crucified according to the scriptures, and that he rose on third day according to the scriptures. He never says anything like, well, the disciples saw him and they told this, He never even uses the word disciples. Everything for him, he's pulling out of scripture and from revelations, private revelations that are being whispered to him, from Christ in heaven. He never even tells us the story of his conversion that Luke tells 3 times in Acts. We don't have anything even close to that from Paul.
Right.
Hey, this is TruthSurge. Can I ask David a question?
Go ahead.
What do you believe, I'm still not 100% sure myself, do you believe that Mark, quote unquote, obviously, wrote his gospel with a personal belief that there was a Jesus somewhere in his recent past? Or do you believe that Mark's gospel, and this is the way I lean, like you said, it was allegory. Do you believe that Mark was one of the early Christians who did believe in the heavenly Jesus, but he, because he knew the Jews had rejected the idea, the message, he wrote his gospel in part to sort of bitch slap the Jews, the Jewish leaders, and also to present this belief that he had in a positive light and make an allegory out of it and include some of the Greek classicals like Homer's Odyssey and Iliad? Is that more like what you think happened?
Yeah, that's exactly what I think happened. And I think he was making an allegory for this celestial figure that we see in the early layers of Christian writing. And it's not, and we see this in other religions too. For instance, the iconography of the Mithras religion, which was a sister religion to Christianity.
Yep.
That whole thing about the bull being killed by Mithras is clearly all an allegory for an astronomical phenomena called the precession of the equinoxes.
Okay, don't get into you sound like you're getting into zeitgeist.
Oh, no, don't get me started on zeitgeist. I'm not
but wait, can I have a question for you, David?
Sure.
Could it be, because like when you were talking about Jesus earlier, a few minutes ago, about the whole descending, I guess you could say, it sounded like kind of like the Greek gods, like they not exactly had a form. They could change their form, yet it's still them. Kind of like like Zeus would appear as a swan.
Yeah.
Is that kind of like the same thing?
I think so. I mean, to be honest with you, Earl Doherty makes a great argument that Paul's Jesus was just such a kind of heavenly Jesus that never showed up on earth and did all these things in that mythical realm, in one of the layers of heaven above us.
Well, if I may.
Sure.
According to what I understand of the ascension of Isaiah, this is where Isaiah gets ascended into heaven. He goes all the way through the layers. The layers are essentially copies of Earth. There's a layer of dirt. There's a layer of if there's something on Earth, there's something in heaven.
Exactly. So you could be there'd be heavenly dirt, heavenly water, heavenly trees, heavenly people, and
so
it would be
he
better
goes up
as you went up, level by level.
Yeah, he goes up. He meets God. God tells him the prophecy of Jesus. Coming, fighting with the devil.
Yeah.
Yes.
So.
Yes. Yeah.
So.
The herring of hell, or something. Like that.
So what happens is he says in verbatim that Jesus goes down in heaven. So he's still in heaven. Fights it on a lower level where the devil is. Loses, dies, gets buried, and then is resurrected.
That's how he does this trip down through layer. He fools the satanic figures there who are prince of powers of the air. He fools them in that realm into crucifying him so that he can do that. And Paul uses the exact same languages when he talks about how, it wasn't earthly principalities and powers who crucified our Lord. It was these celestial, cosmocrates, these cosmic rulers.
The archons.
The archons, exactly.
The archons, yeah, in Greek.
Yeah. The ruler, and Ephesians, the person who wrote Ephesians, who was tagging on to Paul's earlier works, the guy in Ephesians who wrote that, I think it was chapter 2, he said, we don't wrestle with flesh and blood. We wrestle with we wrestle with powers and rulers in heavenly places. And here's the key. He says, he goes on to say that these powers in heaven are doing wicked things in heaven.
Yep.
There's your clue. He ties his version and expounds upon it what Paul was mentioning. And even some of the earlier fathers believed that when Paul mentions the rulers of this age or eon, that this was the demons, not the Romans or the Jews.
Absolutely.
But the demons.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
Can I jump in for a second?
Sure.
There is a there's a claim among Christians that Jesus fulfilled like so many prophecies and things like that. And one of them, I found, yeah, I know, it makes me facepalm too. One of them is, I mean, the one that Bart Ehrman always brings up, which is kind of funny, is in Isaiah 7:14, where you have the he shall be a virgin shall conceive, right?
Right.
And
of course it's not virgin. There was a perfectly good
young
Hebrew word.
Isn't it young woman?
it's Betula. Betula is the Hebrew word for virgin,
Right.
and then Alma, it used the word Alma. And King James, when he was translating that, his translators did so with a Christian bias, so they changed it from
Now, a young woman...
But it was in the Septuagint that way.
Exactly. The
Yes.
Greek for that, the Greek didn't have two specific words. Their word meant the same thing. But in
Parthenos.
Hebrew, exactly, Parthenos meant virgin and young maiden.
Yeah.
But Hebrew broke it out. And if you even read the passage in Isaiah...
It's not even talking
it's
about...
not even talking about the Messiah. Yeah.
It's talking about like the king Ahaz. There are these one kingdom to the north and stuff, and then you have another one that says, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." I think that's in Hosea. Yeah. It's referring to Israel, and then Micah 2:4. He shall be born out of the line of David, and of course that's just they made up the census story of the census, the empire-wide census. And then there's the one about Isaiah 53, the suffering servant, which if you actually look at that, it's Israel. It's supposed to be Israel. Oh, there's so many of these.
Of Israel. But at any rate, you're absolutely right. None of these things are supposedly Messiah prophecies. None of them are prophecies. None of them are about Messiah. You know.
Yeah. Psalm 22. They pierced my hands and feet, and
when he says they, he's talking about lions and
lions. Yeah.
And that he'll get better and then go back to the temple and give thanks to God. It's like, okay, when did that happen? You know. Don't get me started on biblical prophecies. We'll go all night.
Well, I got a topic. I got a point we can take.
Actually, before you get move on to the next point, there is one thing I want to kind of jump in with. Seeing as we don't really have atheists in our group, I think somebody should play the theist advocate, so to speak, for just a brief moment, if you'll forgive me for that.
Okay, well, who here is a former theist?
I'm a former theist.
Okay,
TruthSurge.
Okay, but that aren't the experts in this conversation.
Just give me one moment here, right quick.
I used to
are you gonna take a drink like Mr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? You're gonna take like a drink and you're gonna become a Christian?
No, actually, what I was going to say is that the earliest Christians, as far as we can tell, were more of the Gnostic bent, not believing in an earthly Jesus, but as more of a heavenly thing. And whether or not Jesus exists should not necessarily matter to one's faith, as long as they are a Christian, meaning a follower of Christ. That's all I was going to throw in there, just for any Christians that may be today or later watch this.
Well, yeah,
I take your point. I take your point.
Had really diverse beliefs, very diverse beliefs about Jesus. I mean, and then you had the Docetics who believed that Jesus was 100% God, and then the Ebionites who believed that Jesus was 100% man, and then
the Armenians.
You had the Armenians, and then you had the Marcionites, who actually had a really coherent concept, but they were suppressed by the people who wanted to tie Jesus back into this whole Yahweh thing, and he has a connection to Yahweh, so now you have the useless Old Testament, right? And
Marcion had no use for that. Yeah.
And
so
then,
what was, can you care to share what was the suppressed group's idea of it?
Okay, Marcion was suppressed.
No, but what was their idea of this whole Jesus thing?
That you have the letters of Paul, and then I think it's the Gospel of Luke.
The proto-Gospel of Luke. Yeah.
The proto-evangelium, whatever.
Well, no, I mean, we don't know for a fact that it was Luke or an earlier version of Luke, but it seems to have some relation to Luke. Yeah.
I'm asking, can you describe what their, like, did they believe Jesus was deity? What?
They believe that. I think they believe that Jesus was a deity, or
wasn't he a second, like another God, different from the Old Testament? Wasn't that what Marcionites?
Yeah, that guy was somewhere. That was somewhere else. Yahweh was somewhere else. That's what the Marcionites believed.
Oh, that kind of is coherent. But where'd he come from? Does it answer that?
Oh, they didn't have anything really to add to our our purposes for that. The thing that's cool about the Marcionites is if it hadn't been for them, we probably wouldn't have a New Testament.
What the hell was that?
13 heathen.
Didn't Polycarp compile the first New Testament around 212 or something?
No.
112?
No.
Okay.
Well, what happened was Marcion came up with his groupings of Paul's letter and this letter. And he, I forget what he called it, but when that happened, all of a sudden what we call the Orthodox Church said, oh, we've got to put together a New Testament. So it was like this theological Sputnik, as Robert Price calls it, that went up. And it's before then, nobody had any idea of putting all the letters of the New Testament together into one collection. Just never occurred to anybody to do that.
There's so many letters that Paul writes that are not even in the New Testament, like the epistle to the Laodiceans, Laodiceans.
Yeah. And there's so many other Gospels and Acts and epistles that never even made it to the Bible.
On the camera.
This might be odd, but there's this guy in the chat who keeps mentioning that you keep like tacking you, David. And he I recommend the book Bart Ehrman.
You talking about the Bart Ehrman book, Did Jesus Exist?
Jesus, Apocalyptic Prophet for a New Millennium.
Oh, yeah, I agree.
I've listened to his lecture on that.
Here's the thing about Bart Ehrman. For a staunch non-mythicist, he's one of the best mythicist writers out there. And I definitely recommend that book. I recommend Forged, Jesus Interrupted, Lost Christianities, Lost Scriptures. Just about every single book he's ever written, with the exception of
quoting Jesus,
which I did not like it. I was very disappointed with that.
Oh, really?
It was phoned in. He makes ridiculous circular arguments, and we expected better out of him. Honestly, we thought it would be the best historical arguments to make the case, and it just was phoned in. All the critiques you can read about him online about it, I think, totally nail it. And I'll be responding to his book in my next book as well.
Is it like the case that most theologians now acknowledge that the virgin birth was just kind of like a made-up thing?
Well, most is a strong word, but a lot of them do.
I mean, it's pretty obvious. It's very obvious that it's just all made up.
Sure.
The virgin birth.
Paul never says anything about such a thing. Neither do half the Gospels. So, John matter-of-factly mentions that Jesus is the son of Joseph without even, clarifying it in any way.
Yeah.
Then there's that whole Emmanuel thing.
Yeah, it's like, how is that prophecy when no one in the Gospels calls him Emmanuel ever? Don't get me started.
Wait, does Yeshua mean God with us, or does Emmanuel means God with us?
Yeshua means Savior. God saves, basically. And it's the same name as Joshua.
Yeah, that's funny.
Jesus, the Greek version of those Hebrew names. So it's a very symbolic name, just like so many characters and so many places in the Gospels have just very suspiciously apt names, and he's one of them. Which is another hint that people think this is just an allegory. Mm-hmm. In fact, Robert Price had an idea that when I first heard it, I thought it was crazy, but the more I think about it, the more I think it's really intriguing. We know that Mark was an allegory. Was Mark an allegory for John the Baptist? And is the Jesus that he's describing he's really talking about John the Baptist? There's some interesting things to be said about that. I don't know if it's true or not, but it's an interesting idea.
Why do you think, that the person who wrote John, for example, was like really anti-Semitic, whereas the one who, the other Gospels depict Jesus as more Jewish?
Matthew's very Jewish, for instance. Yeah.
John has the Republican Jesus, as you call him.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think it's in John 8 that it says that the Jews are the children of the devil.
Right.
And
since Jesus is supposed to be a Jew, and so is John, the guy writing this.
Yeah, and notice how before in the crucifixion, in John's Gospel. Mm-hmm. Jesus doesn't finish the Passover feast. He doesn't complete the Passover feast because he doesn't want any Jewish in him. So he says, I'm going to have to crucify before the Passover. But meanwhile, the other Gospels say something else.
He was crucified on the Passover.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I heard was couldn't happen because the Romans would never let that happen, because if it happened on Like, isn't that like in a sense for the Jews like the 4th of July is to us?
Exactly. There's so many things wrong with the trial and execution of Jesus from a historical standpoint. That Jews scholars have been saying this for years. Like nothing in this thing adds up. They dogpile on each other so big, so fast that you can barely keep up with them. And I forgot what my point was going to be about that.
Well, you said there's more to the anti-Semitism of the John's Jesus, where he's about to whip people with cords.
Oh, yeah. It's if you take the details of his of that execution, of what Jesus was doing, they're completely incompatible. He has him going about things in a completely different way than the other Gospels do. And there was something more to the point of that, was that, let me think.
About John?
About John.
Well, he places himself as an eyewitness.
Well, no, he doesn't, but the end of the book does.
Yeah, which is weird.
Here's the thing about that. It never once says John wrote this. That's only been a guessing game that the early church played. Mm-hmm. But the most recent thing that I heard about this, I was discussing this with Richard Carey the other day, is that from the clues in his gospel, it seems really obvious that the beloved disciple, who's the real author of the thing, according to the end of the book, is actually supposed to be Lazarus, the guy he raised from the dead, in an event that happens only in the Gospel of John, doesn't even occur in the other Gospels. In fact, Lazarus is a fictional character in one of the parables in Luke's Gospel.
The guy who is in hell, or is he in heaven?
Right, he's in the
No, the other guy.
There's
two Lazaruses, right? Yeah. You're talking about he's talking about the one that Jesus raises from the dead.
Exactly, in John's Gospel.
And they get the beloved part because in that same passage where Jesus raises him, it goes out of its way to say that Jesus really loved him, and Jesus is depicted as crying over the fact that he has died. And so he's right. It seems that this beloved disciple who is, I make a point about this in my little video series, that it looks like the author has planted him, or the author and later maybe the later person. Any edits. But what I'm saying is that this beloved disciple and the mystery disciple is planted in a couple of different scenes, like where Peter goes in to actually see the interrogation. And there's this mystery disciple there who's not named. Well, there you go. Why did John put him in there? So there'd be an eyewitness to the events, because if there wasn't, then it would be implausible. How would you know what happened if none of the people were there?
And so you mean pretty much ties the story together?
Yes.
And he's cleaning up the plausibility factors from Mark and Matthew. How did they know what Jesus prayed in the garden? That's what John is cleaning up in his version. He's putting these disciples there. Exactly. And he deletes those scenes where he couldn't put him in there, like the prayer in Gethsemane. That scene is not even in John. He took it out because you couldn't have some disciple there eavesdropping on Jesus. It would destroy that whole Jesus alone with God idea. And the temptations, it's not in John.
Where was Jesus? Who was there taking down what was happening? Like where he said, you cannot live by bread alone.
Yeah, that's
there was no stenographer fool following him around. But it's funny. That's actually why the church decided on John as being the author of that gospel originally, is because they did a guessing game. It's like, well, it couldn't be Matthew, but it had to be somebody really close to him. So they decided it had to have been John, but it was completely by process of elimination.
Is this the same John that is supposed to have written Revelation?
Supposed to be, and the epistles of John as well. But
except we don't know this. Elaine Pagel.
Nobody thinks it's the same author. They think it's
Elaine Pagel said that it's not the same. It's not. We don't actually know who wrote Revelation.
That's correct. We know it was John of Patmos, but that doesn't really tell us a lot.
That doesn't tell us anything.
So just a real quick thing. What you cover this in your video, TruthSurge, but which one was it that he still talks about it, but didn't place the mystery disciple in? Where in John he does the he forgets. You mentioned this, that it may have been scholar laziness or just you overlooked it. Where he does talk about an event where he doesn't have a witness involved.
I think there might be two of those in there, and and to be honest with you, I'm trying hard to remember. Is the Transfiguration one of those?
What are you talking about?
I think the he was asking me which see there's some scenes in Mark and Matthew that are completely absent from John, and you have to wonder why.
The Transfiguration is not in John. It's not. It continues on into Acts.
Yeah,
but it's not in John.
So there's one or two little scenes that are in John that kind of make you go, maybe my theory.
It's not in Mark either because it ends at Mark 16:9, I think.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's the
Mark
16:8. It's the last verse in authentic.
Yeah,
Mark.
but even if there's one or two in there in John where maybe there wasn't somebody to see it and he slipped up, I think the evidence is there that he actually did insert a mystery disciple. He does it when they go to the tomb. There's a beloved disciple going to the tomb on that Easter morning, ostensibly, so somebody other than the women could be there to witness it. And even though he has Peter going there, guess who gets there first?
Boom,
the mystery disciple. The one.
And again, this guy never shows up in any of the other Gospels whatsoever. So
and Matthias, is that supposed to be Matthias who was named in Acts?
Nope.
No,
that's the fill-in apostle who came in to replace
Judas
Iscariot. Yeah.
And of course, you have the contradictory accounts of how he died, whether or not he hung himself or he fell over in a pool and
like a water balloon. Yeah.
And his belly spilled open his guts, which is weird.
Yeah. And I love the way Christians harmonize that. Well, clearly he hung himself and then fell off and burst. Like that's how someone would describe it if they. Anyway, cracks me up. I remember what I was going to say earlier about John in compared to the other Gospels, and that's that his motives and the time frame of things happens completely different than it does in the other three Gospels, who are pretty much all ripped off from each other. For instance, when Jesus goes in and kicks out the money changers, in the other Gospels that happens at the end of his career in the last week of his life, and that's one of the things that gets him in trouble with the authorities. Well, John's Jesus, that's one of the first things he does in his 3-year career, and the other thing I want to say is John doesn't even have Jesus die on the same day as the other Gospels.
Yeah, because he doesn't want him to have any Jewish anything.
For him, he is the Passover lamb, and so he has him dying at the same time that the Passover lambs are slaughtered.
Yeah. But let me ask this. This is just open question. Don't we believe that John is reliant on the previous synoptics? Not necessarily Luke, but Mark and Matthew.
Absolutely. Here's the thing: he doesn't try to follow them, but he's clearly working off copies of them. He just doesn't. He does not even care if his account matches up or not. And that's the case with all the Gospels, actually.
Jesus is so angry and pissed, and then very anti-Jewish, and yet, he's not trying. Of course, he's not trying to harmonize in any way. He doesn't mention the earthquake or the dead bodies rising up. Speaking of which, what happened after they finished roaming around Jerusalem?
It was like Night of the Living Dead.
Thank you.
They just crawl back into their graves and just cover themselves up with dirt.
And nobody notices this? Nobody notices? This is one of the other things I talk about from atheists who try to tell me that there was an actual guy named Jesus. It's like we have so many accounts of all these loser wannabe messiahs who just went out and got themselves killed and had a following. And
Tony the Circle Drawer or Apollonius.
All those names. And Aphonges the Shepherd and Thetis and the Egyptian, the unnamed Messiah. All these guys who made a dent in the historical record, and yet the one guy who supposedly really did these things, nothing at all.
The reason that most atheists, and this was one of the reasons I agreed with Jesus existing at the time because I didn't really look into it, that's one of the reasons that they don't look into it, but also that they agree with scholarly consensus because they have no real care or opinion about it. But it's like, if you're going to allow for that, then what else are you going to allow for? You got to know whether or not it actually is true or not.
Sure. And I talk about this issue of bias among historians I'm going to be talking about that in the new book. Because one thing you have to remember is whenever you have a historian asking something about a historical question and they appeal to the historical consensus, as well they should, the thing you have to remember is in the subfield of biblical historians, 90%, it's always been dominated by Christians, or at very least religious, or at very least ex-religious. There's almost no one in that entire field who either comes out of a theological background or originally came out of a theological background. And that includes me too, for that matter. And I'm not saying that to say, oh, so you can't trust anything they have to say, but that's a serious bias to a basic tenet of the mythicist case is, you can't even, this is more dangerous to Christianity than evolution. Because you can twist your beliefs in Christianity to make room for evolution. They do it all the time. But you can't do that with Jesus myth. It is pure kryptonite to Christianity. You can't even accept it tentatively and still be a Christian.
Vertical?
Sorry?
Yeah, just one small thing is that as far as the whole scholars being Christians thing, actually I think around 25 to 30% of them are actually fundamentalist Christians. I mean, not just Christians, but like hardcore, evangelicals. Right, exactly.
They work for him. Yeah. Exactly.
Yes, and just to say this on consensus though, the in science, if you have a consensus, you should question it to make sure there are no good reasons why you should doubt it. You don't wait till you are given a good reason to doubt it. You actually look to make sure there are no good reasons to doubt it.
Right. Exactly.
Because you want your strongest consensus you can possibly have.
Absolutely. And I don't want to bash the consensus as if though I'm some scholar on the outside and I've got the inside track. The fact is, if they had good arguments on their side, and for the most part, actually, most of the consensus opinions in Christian studies does support major chunks of mythicist theory. It's just that most of them won't go far enough all the way to say, and so I don't think there was a Jesus.
Bart Ehrman maintains so many conservative views on the subject. I mean, I love his work.
I do too. I love the man. Yeah.
A lot of his views are very, very... I mean, he just recently gave up the view that Matthew wrote Matthew, I think.
That's huge. I didn't even know that had happened yet. That's huge.
Yeah. One small point I wanted to make, or a small thing I wanted to call out in the comment section on Vong. There's a user here called it's Rothy Time or something, and he says that none of us know anything about scholarship or academia, and I don't think that that's true at all. Since
that's crazy.
I'm a graduate student now, actually, at a very high-ranking school, and I'm sure others here.
I get my source of information of academia from people in academia.
Thank you. Same here.
I read a lot of
more so if he wants to challenge the panelists, he's more than welcome to contact.
Well, yeah, that's
David Fitzgerald. Don't you know Richard Carrier, which is a very renowned historian?
He's my best friend. He's my best friend.
I would love to have no offense, this might be going off topic, but I would love to have him on a future episode.
I'll talk to him.
I mean, we haven't really done that many historical shows because trying to find historians are like really annoyingly hard.
It's true. Well, I'll tell you that right now.
And also getting a job as an historian isn't really.
Oh yeah, that is also tough. I mean, when he got his degree, the first thing they told him is, "And there are no jobs anymore. Sorry."
Unless you want to be a museum curator or at most a librarian.
Or you're going to work at the Gap or something,
Well, yeah.
There's nothing in history right now. History is a completely dead.
We're so preaching to the choir. So preaching to the choir. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Study a lot of the Bible's history. There's Bart Ehrman also highlights. Oh, and I have a question.
Sure.
Let me just finish this one. But he also highlights that there's sort of prophecy in Daniel, where the
seven sevens.
Not Daniel 7. It's Daniel 3.
No. I'm sorry. The prophecy is called the 7 times 70s, or the.
Oh yeah, the seven weeks of years. But I was also referring to in Daniel 3 when there's 3 used Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are put into the fire. It says that the Son of God was there, but it's not actually. I mean, King James also translated that.
Right.
It's actually an angel, one of the sons of God.
Yes.
Are
And when you read Job, there's all these sons of gods floating around, including Satan, who's palling
angels.
around.
Well, yeah, that's what you see in Genesis with the giants.
The Nephilim. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely.
And my question was, well, did the apostles die for a lie? I just have to get. Is that an early?
Yeah, that's a great question because you hear this a lot. Well, first of all, to people who would put that out there, it's like, well, what gospel says they did? You know.
Yeah, it doesn't say that in any gospels.
Yeah. I mean, the gospels. There's no Christian writing that even agrees on who the apostles were. We don't have the same list of names from any.
Stephen? Didn't Stephen die?
An apostle, but still, yeah.
Okay. I mean, if I remember correctly, that's a part of it.
The only one it even mentions out of the names that we get given as apostles was James. John or James, the son of Zebedee. One of those gets mentioned that he was killed in Acts. But everybody else, there's not a word. Not even Paul. We don't even have anything in the Gospels about, in the New Testament, saying when Paul died. And in fact, our earliest account of his doesn't say anything about him being killed by Nero, which is what church tradition has always said. It says that he went back to Spain, out to the westernmost part of the empire, and he died there somewhere. And it doesn't even say he was martyred. It just said, after he gave his witnesses, then he died and went to heaven.
Right. He wasn't beheaded, or we don't know that.
Our earliest accounts from Clement of Rome, and he says nothing about Paul or being killed in Rome. Nothing about it.
Okay. So when he's writing, saying, "I have finished the race, I have kept the faith in all that," he's not. Doesn't he write like he's about to be executed?
Does he? That's a great question.
It sounds like he's talking to a someone else.
2 Timothy 4:7.
Well, what it sounds like in the context that you are putting it is that he's essentially saying, "I'm done with what I wanted to do. I've kept the faith. I've done that." But it doesn't indicate necessarily that he's going to be executed. What that indicates is that he's just done with what he was trying to do.
And let me tell you something. It's a moot point because Paul didn't write 1st and 2nd Timothy.
Yeah,
he didn't write that at all.
That's a good point to bring up. That's a good point because the pastorals and Titus, they don't come around till at least 140 to 150. And how do we know that? Marcion didn't have them. If he'd have thought Paul wrote those, you damn well right. He would have had those among Paul's epistles.
Excellent point. And
okay, that's a good point.
To cover biases that may be in the scholarly consensus, when you look at their dating method, are they dating it to be before a predicted event? Essentially, what TruthSurge covered was, are they trying to show that saying that the conclusion they reach on when it's dated is most likely before the event to keep the prophecy alive, and that's how you can tell.
They all would love to that, and they'd love it to be within like the 30s or 40s. They'd love it to be within the lifetime of the apostles who they say wrote it.
Except we don't know
that they show no good reason for why.
No, they're
just
not.
Basing off of.
And they get a lot of details wrong about that area.
Exactly.
So that's I mean, Matthew and Luke cannot even agree on the circumstances of Jesus' birth. So why would you expect them to be written by people living at that time? Exactly. But I was talking about. Okay, sorry. There's this thing in Daniel.
I was just going to add that they also contain giveaways that they're writing generations after the fact.
Mm-hmm. There's this thing in Daniel that says that there was a prophecy predicted 400 years before Jesus was born to the exact date that Jesus was born. 490 years.
As if we knew what that date was for starters, anyway. But yeah.
The 70 weeks.
Yeah. Here's the thing about Daniel, because I do talk about Daniel in my book that didn't get published, so I need to pull that out in the next one. Daniel itself, that book is a forgery, and in fact, it's
165, right? About that time.
And it's an attempt to correct a forgery in the original Daniel, which itself was written in an attempt to correct a missing prophecy in Jeremiah. So it's just it's mind-bogglingly ridiculous how bad the chain of evidence is for this so-called prophecy. For starters,
Sunnis love Daniel
they
because
love Daniel. Yeah.
The end. They say it predicts the end times. You have the idols made of, one is made of wood, one is made of bronze, one is made of, wait, hold on, Daniel, bronze, wood, bronze statue, and it says that like it's supposed to predict the date that Jesus was born to 400 years, except we don't know when Jesus was born. And
in fact, the only ones who mention when he was born, like I think it was, I'm not sure if you mentioned it, but if Matthew's right, it happened during Herod's life, around 4 or 5 BC at the latest. If Luke is right, it happened when Quirinius was governor of Syria, which would have to be like 6 or 7 AD at the earliest. So there's a 10-year gap.
I got a question for you.
Yeah.
I've just read a little bit about the fig tree. You know, the whole fig tree thing.
Oh yeah, he curses the fig tree out of season.
Yes, but like the odd thing is with one other reference to a fig tree, which I found, which was the Greek mythology of Odysseus, with him being pulled out of being pulled out of a whirlpool, I guess you would call it.
Maelstrom.
Maelstrom, yeah.
Yeah, the maelstrom. Yeah. So what's it? So what is that like? Is that where that symbolization could have come from?
It certainly could have. I mean,
it was like the Bible back then.
Sure, and it's very obvious that all the authors of our Gospels were really familiar with things like the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Bacchae and other classics of Greek. That's how we know. One of the reasons we know they were so educated is because they made these allusions to them. And I want to say it's Dennis MacDonald who wrote the Gospel of Mark and the Homeric epics, where he talks about all these different not parallels per se, but motifs that are coming out of these Greek sources.
Yeah, there. If I could jump in there is a scene in the Odyssey where Odysseus is he's
coming back.
He's coming up to this foreign city, and it's really big and amazing. And on the way, he notices that there's fruit trees that bloom all year, or they give fruit all year round. And also the fig tree is mentioned in that scene, if I'm not mistaken.
From what I've looked up, the fig tree in Odysseus is mentioned when he when his boat's ripped apart. I mean, I just wikied it quickly, so I'm not sure.
He does.
But anyway, the point I was going to make was that Mark could be, as MacDonald notes, Mark could be remembering that scene and inverting the fig tree, so that in the Odyssey, the trees bear fruit all year round, and in Mark's version, the fig trees is not bearing any fruit, even though it's out of season. But he could have been remembering that fruit part along with the amazement of seeing a big city, and that's what Jesus alludes to when he first goes into the Jerusalem. He says, "Look at all these great buildings," and it seems like Mark's remembering that scene of Odysseus going into, I forget the city name, unfortunately.
Sure. But
I think the reason that he may have included the cursing of it was to exhibit power over nature and that kind of thing. Yeah. Which is
and Christians have also said that this is really symbolic of Israel, and Israel, the Jews are the fig tree, and he cursed them because they rejected its message. But when you start saying things like that, aren't you as good as saying that this whole thing is a parable already? Even the things that are nominally supposed to have been actual historical events. And you can multiply that dozens of times throughout the gospel.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, do we have any dating on when the Gospel of Judas was supposed to be written?
Sometime in the 2nd century. I don't know if they've fine-tuned it any more than that.
What are the contents of the Gospel of Judas?
Well, it's kind of full of Swiss cheese holes, so there's not a lot to it. If I remember correctly, Judas basically agrees to betray God because he knows it's going to be Christ, because it's going to be part of God's plan. So it's very sympathetic in that sense. But the actual manuscript itself is really spotty, and so it's hard to really get a whole grip on the whole story in there.
There's also there's another story where Salome, the son of the daughter of Herod,
I think the niece of Herod,
tries to test if Mary's a virgin.
Oh, Salome, yeah, the handmaiden of the midwife rather. She's giving birth, and as soon as she's given birth, the midwife tests her for virginity, because I mean that's what midwives do, clearly.
Yeah.
And it burns her hand or something like that, and she turns out a virgin again. You know, it's like why that story would ever happen in real life, no one seems to think about. But yeah,
that's even make it
apocryphal ones that came later.
It's in the proto-evangelion of James, the proto-gospel of James.
Right. And that I can't remember if that was actually the Virgin Mary. I had to have been Virgin Mary. Yeah, I was going to say or
the Virgin
John's
Mary.
Mother. But the second century saw all these different gospels and acts and epistles.
There's one where Jesus kills a guy and by pushing him off a roof, isn't there?
Well, there's one where he's like...
Isn't he a child when he does that?
He's like the freaky kid from the Twilight Zone episode who keeps wishing people into the cornfield. He has all these freaky powers, but he's just a little bratty kid, you know. So, yeah, he's
It
killing...
sounds like Damien.
Yeah, very like...
Oh, yeah, from The Omen.
Yeah,
I was just thinking of The Omen, too.
Yep.
Yeah, there are a bunch of stories where he actually, I think, he pushes him off and raises from the dead. Yep.
Guys, we only have 10 minutes left, so I would suggest we do final statements, possibly, or final conclusions, or something like that.
Can I put in a plug for my book?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Wait. Can we do that in the last 5 minutes?
Sure.
So, everyone else did their final statements, which will bring us to 8:55-ish. So, and also, Paul C. Hartley, are you still alive?
Yeah.
That's no.
Yeah, I'm still around. It's you guys have been going at it and hammer and tong, and in many cases you've been like way over my head, so I've just shut up. You know, that old adage of, you know, people might think you're stupid, but, you know, open your mouth and confirm it.
Well, what's your conclusion of this whole conversation?
I'm leaning towards definitely what David and TruthSurge are saying. Yeah.
Just smile and nod.
Just smile and nod. I'm gonna smile and nod.
Okay. Boom.
Okay, my conclusion off of this is the more you look into it, the more you see that there's parts that don't make sense. The more you see that it's not substantiated, and that's a biases, and that the arguments for the reason that he exists are no arguments at all. They're just not arguments, and that the evidence is more pointing on the side that he didn't exist than the side that he does exist.
Okay, polymath?
Jesus could not have ascended into heaven if he bodily resurrected, because if he kept on going into heaven, he would just go into orbit. You can't ascend into heaven. So to me, that is the nail in the coffin for the resurrection for me, because he should still be alive right now if he did ascend.
Okay, realistic knowledge? I think he's dead. Caden?
Sure. My thoughts are this. Do not listen to those so-called biblical scholars who are fundamentalist Christians or even moderate Christians. They are heavily biased. They have a vested interest in protecting their belief system. So read the evidence for yourself, look into the evidence for yourself, and be skeptical. Be skeptical. That's all I have.
TruthSurge?
I pretty much agree with everything I've heard. I think some of you may know my own views by what has transpired today, but I like to liken it to a 1,000-piece puzzle. And if you only have 10 pieces in your hand, no way in hell are you going to be able to say, I've got a seascape puzzle here. You can't. You can't. That might be a dress. Those might be waves in a dress. You don't know. So the way that we're getting to all this stuff is really by trying to put as many pieces on the table as we can, then back up and see what that makes. Don't say, oh, I know what it makes. Put them on the table and then put the colors together and see what it makes. I think that's what's happening when we're coming together with all the extraneous, extra biblical stuff like the Homers and stuff like that. It's all coming together, making a little bit better picture, a little bit clearer. But we still don't have all the pieces. But that's how I think we're getting there. I think this stuff we're talking about today, I think it'll be taught in universities one day.
13 Heathen.
In part to restate, and in part because we don't currently have a Christian here, I really feel like hammering home one small point, which is that there are so many people within the Christian community that focus so much on Jesus' death, and even trying to insist that he lived, that most people, the message is lost somewhere down the line. And I think it'd be much better if these people focus on the good in the message and the values that are put forward, instead of just dogmatically holding on to this idea that this person lived and was crucified. Because in some of that message, there is good that can be gleaned, that can be brought forward. And if you stop focusing on this idea of death, maybe you'll be able to get more out of life and more out of faith if you are a Christian. And if you're not, well, then it doesn't matter either way.
Okay, you could plug your book now.
Well, actually, I wanted to just second what you guys have said. I get that the idea that there was no Jesus is a hard sell for a lot of people, even a lot of atheists. And 15 years ago, it never even crossed my mind. It wasn't until I started getting curious about what we could know about the real Jesus and what was just legend.
Realistic. Wait, I think Realistic's alive.
Yeah.
Do you have any final comments?
I don't know shit about no Jesus yet.
Okay, continue.
But I was going to say, for me, the reason I even pursue it is it's not from, I have no problem with there having been a Jesus. There's nothing implausible about that. It's just knowing what we know now and knowing the way Christianity began. There's so many things that would be different even if there had been a guy named Jesus. And I like what Robert Price said about it. It says, for all practical intents and purposes, even if there had been an actual guy named Jesus, for all practical intents and purposes, there isn't one anymore, because all the information we have about that guy is completely disconnected from anybody who really lived in the first century. So if I don't make you an atheist about Jesus, I at least want to make you militant agnostics about Jesus.
Or skeptical.
Yeah, that you don't know and nobody else does either, you know.
You could
and again, book is nailed 10 Christian myths that show Jesus never existed at all, and that it's not hyperbole at all. That's exactly what I think is the case.
At a bookstore near you, what kind of bookstores will we find it
at? You got it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You can get an ebook. You can get an audiobook that is coming out very shortly.
Hey, David, can I get a free copy if I plug it on my channel?
We'll talk later.
I got 7,000 subs, man.
I was gonna say maybe you and David should write a book together. It's truth.
Shoot, that would be awesome.
Yeah,
if you should bring me on Facebook, I'd love that.
I'm not on Farcebook.
Conversation.
He just called it Farcebook. Yeah.
And I was gonna say, if any of the readers out there have any questions or think I'm wrong about something, if I'm wrong, I want to know. So let me know. Do get a hold of me. It's everybodylovesdave@gmail.com. So let me hear from you.
This is actually how you can know the difference between...
One at a time. What?
Yeah.
Wait, David, you said Fred on Facebook?
Okay, Polymath first, then Boom.
Polymath?
Wait, did you say you wanted us to friend you on Facebook?
Yeah, that'd be great.
It's the same as this. It's David Fitzgerald. Also, please tune in for the after show, which will start in about 10 minutes from 9. And we had a very interesting discussion. And it was a pleasure having you, David.
Thanks so much, you guys.
I wouldn't mind having you on again.
I'd love that.
Also, don't forget to friend him on Facebook, as he said. So he asked for it, I guess, if you friend him. So yeah. So this is the Lying Ghost Show signing out. See you in roughly 12 minutes, 10 past 9.